One weekday afternoon, a Florida family's typical after-school routine is changed forever.
This case was even more tragic because it happened in the place where the victim should have felt the most secure.
Investigators are baffled. How did the offender get away with this, and why?
We had to consider if there was a reason why the perpetrator picked this victim and this location.
Now detectives fear that it's only a matter of time before he strikes again. This quiet lakeside community of Pasco County, Florida, attracts young families seeking solitude and safety. No one imagines that a violent crime could take place in their homes. Until now. On a day in January, the Kohlhauer family arrives home in the evening to confront the unthinkable. Their teenage daughter, Jennifer, is found dead in an upstairs bedroom. The death of this attractive, popular young woman shocks the neighborhood. Sergeant Bobby Lightfoot is the first officer on the scene.
Jennifer was initially found in this upstairs bedroom by her brother. She was on her right side, her head was up there, her feet down here. She was wearing a shirt and tennis shoes, and it was obvious that she had been stabbed.
One clue suggests that the perpetrator had forced his way into the bedroom.
As I turned to leave the room, I noticed the door jamb appeared to be forced open as someone had kicked the door to make entry.
But there are no signs to suggest that the criminal has forced his way into the house. Who would want this young woman dead, and why? Investigators search for answers.
I noticed a knife on the floor that apparently had blood on it. We collected samples from the body for possible DNA evidence and continued through the house looking for fingerprints and any other physical evidence that we could find.
The evidence is taken to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, investigators turn their attention to the victim herself. Everything they learn suggests she's an unlikely target for murder.
Jennifer was a very popular young lady, very studious. She had a lot of ambition, a lot of drive. She was someone that any parent would be very proud of.
Investigators retrace her steps the evening of her death. They learn Jennifer was last seen jogging in her neighborhood on the afternoon she was killed. The medical examiner's report supplies additional details.
The autopsy report indicated that the time of death was sometime between approximately 4:30 to 6 p.m. that day. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled. We found a knife at the scene that had blood on it that was determined to have been used.
While the lab results tell police when and how the victim died, they say nothing about who might have done this.
Initially, the DNA and fingerprint evidence that we had collected at the scene did not match anything we had on file at that time.
Until there is a suspect profile to compare them to, these clues, for now, are worthless. Detectives immediately go to work canvassing the neighborhood. Could the killer be someone living among them?
We were looking at any individuals that may have information, any possible suspects. Obviously, your initial thoughts that maybe this person might be in the neighborhood. It could have been a predator, sexual deviant. You didn't know exactly what you were looking for, so we were considering a lot of possibilities.
As the investigation gets underway, the list of possible suspects continues to grow. Detectives hope that other, more subtle clues left at the scene can help narrow the field once they're interpreted. They decide to consult with Special Agent Dale Hinman. As she reviews the evidence, she is immediately struck by how the crime was carried out.
Some crimes appear to be very disorganized and frenzied, while other crimes appear to be committed by an individual who is highly organized. This case really didn't fit into either of the categories.
But there are clues that lead Hinman to believe they are looking for a predator.
This was a very unusual crime for this community. We had to consider that she may be a targeted victim and that other young women in this immediate area might be at risk.
Jennifer Kohlhauer is found dead in her home one weekday evening. As the case heats up, Lieutenant James Carpenter joins the team. He and Agent Hinman head to the Kohlhauer home for a first-hand look at the crime scene. They start by trying to figure out how the offender got into the house.
This is the crime scene here.
Would the family have normally kept the doors locked during the day?
Yeah, we found that the doors and windows were consistently locked. There was no evidence of any kind of illegal entry here.
If I look at your crime scene pictures here, I can see that there's a deadbolt lock and all the back doors as well are secure.
We're looking at this as though the perpetrator entered through the front door.
Would the victim have let people into the home during the day?
She was a pretty savvy girl. No, we don't believe she would have. And we're looking at this as a familiar type person.
To Hinman, this is a significant clue.
Well, then it seems more likely that this is either somebody the victim knew or somebody who fits into this neighborhood, appears to belong in the neighborhood, and she either recognized him or he didn't look unusual to her at all.
Another detail in the timeline suggests that the perpetrator might have been stalking his prey.
Yeah, we believe this crime occurred between 4 and 6 in the afternoon.
What would have been going on in the neighborhood at about that time?
Well, there would have been an abundance of activity going on here. People on the street, vehicles up and down, neighbors milling about, all kinds of activity here.
This is a very high-risk crime for this offender with all the activity that's in this neighborhood. It sounds like the individual may have been familiar with the family schedule or that he may have been watching her.
In a community this small, investigators feel certain that the neighbors would have noticed someone loitering outside the house. So they dig deeper, asking neighbors if they noticed a person or a car lingering around that end of the block that day. Eventually, a common thread begins to emerge.
During the neighborhood interview, several of the witnesses brought up the fact that there was a red Corvette parked in the driveway at the neighbor's home for sale.
In a neighborhood of mostly family cars, a red sports car attracts attention. Investigators pursue the lead.
Well, we started having a lookout posted for all red Corvettes in the Tampa Bay area. We developed about over 100 leads where red Corvettes were stopped and people identified.
But for now, the leads don't pay off.
At that point in the investigation, all we had was a description of a red Corvette. It would have been nice to have a partial or complete tag number.
Without it, the investigation appears stalled. But not for long. They pick up another lead, one that points to an unusual person rather than a car.
We discovered a peer of the victim, a neighbor, a young man who lived in the area who had a pretty bad background. He had a history of involved in assorted criminal activity, had problems in school.
Behind the youthful gaze lies a troubled young man with a criminal record, and detectives find something that puts him at the top of their list of suspects.
He had built a fort in a wooded area across the street from where the victim lived. The fort is hidden from view from outside, but it did give a good view of the victim's house.
While the fact that the young man knows Jennifer makes him a likely suspect, Hinman isn't convinced that someone so close in age to the victim would have committed this crime.
We weren't convinced that this individual was capable of overpowering Jennifer, but every suspect and every lead has to be investigated to its logical conclusion.
The young man lives a block away from Jennifer, and it would have been easy for him to keep tabs on her usual activities.
He would know when she came home and pretty much what her daily habits were.
And when police questioned the young man's mother about what he had done the day Jennifer was killed, she mentioned something that triggers an alarm.
He had taken a shower that evening, which was not normal. She stated that he normally took showers in the morning.
Investigators in the Jennifer Kohlhauer homicide bring in a suspicious young man from her own neighborhood for questioning.
During the interview of this individual, he responded he was rather arrogant and even made the statement, "I did not kill that damn girl."
His defensiveness makes police even more leery of the young man. They ask him to submit to a blood test.
We received permission to take samples of his blood, which in turn was sent to the lab.
At the lab, the suspect's DNA is compared to evidence found at the scene. The results surprised detectives.
The results came back negative, and he was ruled out as a suspect.
With their first solid lead eliminated, the team moves on to consider other possible suspects.
So what are the results so far of your interviews in the neighborhood with the victim's associates and her friends?
Well, we interviewed most of her friends and peers, associates, and really pretty much ruled them out as being involved in this crime.
Hinman believes it's time to consider the possibility that this crime was committed by a total stranger who somehow didn't appear out of place in the neighborhood.
Now that you've eliminated all the people who live in the neighborhood and all the peer group of the victim, the more I think about this case, the more likely it would be that this is an individual who's older than the victim, somebody who's a little more criminally sophisticated, more experienced, somebody who's able to smooth talk their way into this home.
Hinman still wants to know how he ended up in this particular neighborhood and whether Jennifer was chosen at random.
I recall it took us a lot of turns to get to the victim's house. This really isn't near any of the major roads that run through Pasco County.
It's kind of off the beaten path here. It's quite a distance from I-75, one of the main highways going through the county. It's away from the populated areas along the coast.
Given how far this house is from any major roads, certainly a vehicle is required to commit this crime. And it sounds more like an individual who's just driving around looking for a specific type of victim.
Hinman is confident the killer will turn out to be someone who is usually on the move, a predator who waits for an opportunity to present itself. Once again, police turn their attention to the unidentified red Corvette seen in the neighborhood on the day of the murder. They go back to their original witnesses and dig up new ones, probing for any detail, no matter how small. Finally, the team strikes pay dirt. One of the witnesses remembers a detail they had forgotten during the first round of interviews.
We received information that the red Corvette had Missouri tags, although unfortunately we did not have a tag number.
And that's not all. Detectives also locate several people who remember seeing the car's driver.
The driver of the red Corvette was described as a white male, black hair, light complexion, clean-shaven, good-looking.
Police bring in an artist to produce a sketch based on the descriptions from the neighborhood canvas. Eyes, hair, a mouth, and eventually an entire face. Was this the man who killed Jennifer Kohlhauer? Detectives need a name to go with that face. But where should they be looking? Once again, they consult with Agent Hinman. Reviewing the case files, Hinman is once again struck by the coldly efficient manner used to carry out such a violent act.
Sometimes what happens in a crime can be just as important as what doesn't happen. We know that the real motive for this crime was not robbery because nothing was missing from the family's home. We know that what happened to this victim occurred in such a short window of time that this may suggest he has done this before.
Broadening their search, investigators send out a national bulletin for the car and the stranger. The broadcast immediately produces a hit. A similar case had occurred in Indiana just a few months before Jennifer's death. This time, the victim was Wendy Gallagher.
Both of these cases involved young ladies, both of them being home alone. It involved the basic same time of day, same type area. There were too many similarities between these two cases to be overlooked, and we needed to focus on that.
In the Indiana case, police were also looking for a smooth talker who was able to charm his way in the front door.
We all felt confident that this crime was committed by the same perpetrator.
And, like the Kohlhauer case, there was little evidence to go on.
In the Indiana case, they have not, as of that date, identified any suspects.
So far, it appears that the killer may have gotten away with the same crime twice. Determined to stop him before he strikes again, investigators search anxiously for news of the red Corvette, and before long they find it, over 1,000 miles away in Texas. A red Corvette is spotted over 1,000 miles away from Pasco County, Florida, where Jennifer Kohlhauer was murdered.
We received information that a police officer in Texas was following a red Corvette who he believed was involved in a drug investigation.
The Texas officer loses the car in traffic, but not for long.
The officer located the car in a motel parking lot, so he went to the front office to get the room number so he could speak to the driver.
The policeman approaches the motel room door and knocks. When a man opens the door, the officer identifies himself.
At that time, the suspect in this case pulled out a revolver and shot him 2 times.
Backup units respond immediately, but it's too late to save the life of Officer Paul Hulsey Jr.
The suspect fled on foot from the motel, ended up at a restaurant, where in turn he took a cab from that location.
It doesn't take long for Texas police to track down the cab.
The Texas officers pulled the cab over and took the passenger into custody.
The man apprehended by authorities is Michael Lee Lockhart. There's solid evidence connecting him to the death of the Texas officer. But will they find anything linking him to the murders of Jennifer Kohlhauer and Wendy Gallagher? Police impound his vehicle.
They searched the Corvette and found 2 tags. The Florida tag that was on the vehicle at the time and a Missouri tag that was inside the vehicle.
Florida detectives believe they've found their suspect, but can they prove it?
Lockhart was a good suspect in this case. He was driving a red Corvette, there was a Florida license plate in the vehicle, and he matched the composite.
The police request a DNA sample from Lockhart, and he submits to a blood test. When Lockhart's DNA is compared to the DNA found at Jennifer Kohlhauer's house, it's a match. Lockhart is brought to Florida to stand trial. Then, in a surprising turn, he pleads guilty.
Like I said, he knows he's caught. He knows that there's no avenue out of here. He can prolong it. He can say he's not guilty and cause trials to happen and go through all of that. But all that's going to do is prolong it.
Lockhart is convicted for the murder of Jennifer Kohlhauer. He is also found guilty of the murders of Wendy Gallagher and Officer Paul Hulsey Jr. He receives 3 death sentences. Investigators never learn why Lockhart targeted these victims.
Nothing can take away the pain that Lockhart caused to the victims and their families. He was an individual who made his living out of preying upon innocent, hardworking people.
Michael Lee Lockhart is put to death by lethal injection in Texas.
Observant neighbors and a solid investigation put an end to his smooth-talking life of crime.